It is that time of the NFL offseason where crazy trade proposals are made. Every news outlet has some kind of blockbuster trade that every team has to make, and most of them do not come to fruition. In fact, I would argue that 99% of these trade suggestions and these trade rumors never see the light of day. But there is one trade rumor that has come out that I think does make a lot of sense for the Detroit Lions. Now, personally, I am very cautious about these trade rumors. I don't usually report on them just because a lot of them don't have much validity. Most of them don't have very much substance to them, other than the fact that, oh, big name player to big time team. And either the trade doesn't make sense for the player, doesn't make sense for one of the two teams, or doesn't make sense for either of the teams. There are trades that have been suggested throughout the offseason, like Buda Baker to the Detroit Lions or Amari Cooper being traded or a player of that nature. And those things don't usually make very much sense for the Detroit Lions. However, this trade rumor that has come around does actually seem to have some water to stand on and does actually seem to have some validity and substance to it. That trade, of course, being Matthew Judon potentially being traded from the New England Patriots and being home of the Detroit Lions. Now, a big reason as to why Matthew Judon has been connected to the Detroit Lions, other than just the, good player to good team, is the fact that Matthew Judon was a Michigan native. He grew up in Pontiac, Michigan, went to school at Grand Valley State University, a very high-level Division II school right here in the center of Michigan. And in his senior year, he put up over 82 tackles and 21 sacks. He was one of the best edge rushers in the state in the 2018 NFL draft, and he is a player that is just been really, really solid for his entire career. Now, after his time at Grand Valley State, he was drafted in the 5th round of the 2016 NFL draft by the Baltimore Ravens, where he spent the first 5 years of his NFL career. In those 5 years, Matthew Judon played in all but 4 games for the team, where he had 236 tackles, 34 and a half sacks, 54 tackles for loss, 103 quarterback hits, 7 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, 10 passes defended, while being named to the Pro Bowl twice in his final 2 years as a Raven. After his time in Baltimore, Matthew Judon moved on to the New England Patriots, where he signed for a total of 4 years. He has played 3 of those years so far with 1 year remaining. And in those 3 seasons in New England, Matthew Judon has been arguably even better than he was in Baltimore, with 133 tackles, 33 tackles for loss, 62 quarterback hits, a safety, 32 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, 4 passes defended, 2-time Pro Bowler, as well as being ranked in the top 10 of Defensive Player of the Year voting in 2022. Now, unfortunately, in 2023, Matthew Judon had a season-ending injury. He played just 4 games into the NFL year until he tore his lower right bicep, which left him out indefinitely and for the remainder of the 2023 season. That is a major injury to come back from, and for a player that is already at 32 years old, Matthew Judon, of course, does have some question marks around how quickly he's able to recover, whether or not he'll be the same player when he comes back from injury, and that, of course, is going to either lower his draft stock or lower his value for the New England Patriots. However, taking a look at Matthew Judon with New England over the last 3 seasons, he has been nothing short of incredible. In 2021, Matthew Judon totaled 12 and a half sacks and 14 tackles for loss in his first season in New England, being one of the best defensive players out there and one of the most underrated players in the NFL. In 2022, he took a step up, having 15 and a half sacks, but taking a step back to have just 5 tackles for loss. And then he came into 2023 on pace to do even better. Through 4 games, he had 4 sacks and 5 tackles for loss, meaning in a 17-game stretch, he was on pace for well over 17 sacks and 20 tackles for loss on the season. Now, that injury is, of course, going to hurt his value, and it is going to hurt his trade stock. But I think even still, if Matthew Judon can pass the physical, and if he can come back and play like even a half of what he was in New England, I think a trade would be warranted for the Detroit Lions to go get him. If they can get a guy that's going to give you 8 to 9 sacks alongside Aiden Hutchinson, let alone a player that is still capable of 12, 15, 17 sacks on the year, like Judon has shown the last 3 years of his career, this is a no-brainer for the Detroit Lions to make this trade, especially considering what the value would likely be. Now, obviously, value and talent is not the only things to consider when going into a trade. Contractual obligations and capital is a huge thing for NFL teams, and it's even bigger for Brad Holmes than most others. Now, Matthew Judon is under contract for one more season with the New England Patriots. His contract officially expires in 2024 with a cap hit of $14.6 million in this year, as well as a void year in 2025 to kind of spread out that money a little bit, where he will receive $2.3 million in the 2025 year for whatever team rostered him last, unless of course otherwise contractually changed. So with that being said, that is a pretty big financial compensation for the player. That is a pretty big ask for a team that is expecting to save up their money. But even with that being the case, I think the Detroit Lions can make it work. The Detroit Lions, as of right now, have $34.5 million of cap space available for 2024, and as of right now have $44.5 million saved up for 2025. Now, the widely regarded scenario that a lot of people have in their heads is that the Detroit Lions are going to roll over as much cap as possible for 2025 because they have to spend money on their veterans, their homegrown talent of Ali McNeil and Ifeatu Melifonwu and Derek Barnes and Aiden Hutchinson and Taylor Decker potentially if he wants to come back and the Lions want to bring back their veteran left tackle. There is some big money that will be thrown around next year. And $44.5 million probably won't get it all done, but somewhere close to $70-80 million absolutely would go a long way to helping get those contracts done. So there is certainly going to be some hesitation about whether or not to bring in Matthew Judon. However, even if the Lions do make this trade, the Lions can still roll over nearly $20+ million to 2025, which in the grand total would put them in between $65 and $70 million of cap space, which is still so helpful for signing those players, as well as getting Matthew Judon for a potential Super Bowl run in 2024. So financially, while it might not be ideal and it might not be the perfect scenario, it is a very capable, and the Lions are still very capable of making this happen while rolling over a large number into 2025 to help with that cap space. So financially, they can do this. From a capital standpoint, they can achieve this. But what about from the picks perspective? Well, the Detroit Lions next year have 7 picks in 2025. They have their first and second round picks. They have 2 fourth round picks. They have a 5th round selection, as well as 2 selections in the 6th round of the NFL draft, one of which is the result of the Carlton Davis trade, where they received 2 6th round picks and Carlton Davis in return for the 3rd. So with that being the case, with Matthew Judon being older, more expensive, coming off of a major injury, but still incredibly productive and very valuable to a win now football team, what is the price going to be? How are the Detroit Lions going to give up this capital, and what capital are they going to have to give up in order to make this deal happen? Well, personally, considering all of the factors, considering what New England needs, considering what the Lions need, considering what, some of the other trades in the past have been between Brad Holmes and other general managers, I think a very fair trade would be a 5th round selection in 2025, as well as a 6th round selection in 2025, that likely being the Bucs trade, but potentially being the Lions, depending on which pick they are able to maneuver around, for Matthew Judon in a 2025 7th round selection. Now, Brad Holmes is a big believer in not losing draft capital as far as number of picks. If he can do a pick swap, if he can get a couple of picks in return, he will absolutely do it. We saw with TJ Hockenson, where they gave up 2 4th round picks in TJ Hockenson, but they got back that 2nd and that 3rd round selection. We saw it last year with Carlton Davis, where they gave up a 3rd round selection for Carlton Davis, but they also got back 2 6th round picks that the Buccaneers were looking to part with. Almost every single time Brad Holmes makes a trade for the Detroit Lions, he does a pick swap. He gets picks in return, so that way he has ammo in the NFL draft to either move up or select and inject young talent into this roster. And even if it's just a 7th round round selection, I think Brad Holmes would be willing to make this deal. You give up 2 day 3 picks for an immediate impact starter, even for a 1-year rental, but you get that 7th round pick in return. This would allow the Detroit Lions, of course, to have their true edge rusher too, as well as still holding 6 selections in the 2025 NFL draft, but also would allow the Patriots to get 2 middling selections in the day 3 of the NFL draft, more ammo to build around Drake May for a day 3 weapon, a day 3 protector, potentially ammo to move up in the NFL draft. And you might say that a 5th and a 6th round pick isn't that significant for an NFL franchise looking to rebuild, but look at what Brad Holmes has done with the NFL draft picks on day 3, right? You're talking Amon-Ra St. Brown. You're looking at Derek Barnes. You're looking at James Houston. You're looking at a couple of really strong offensive linemen, right? There is a lot of talent on day 3 of the NFL draft, and whether that talent is selected at the exact pick or those picks are used to move up in the 2nd, the 3rd round for better players and players that the Patriots want, that extra ammo could be really enticing for a rebuilding team who really isn't going to maximize Matthew Judon next year. Even if Matthew Judon comes back and has a 10, 15 sack season, right? It's probably going to be wasted on a New England Patriots team that has a ceiling of probably 7 to 8 wins next year. As opposed to that, they could get rid of their veteran, get a couple of draft picks in return, still probably have that 6 to 7 win ceiling, but also have a lot more cap space to work with next year, also have more picks in the NFL draft this time around. And I think that this trade does make sense for both sides. And while New England isn't necessarily desperate to get rid of Matthew Judon, I think Matthew Judon wants to win a ring. He's 32 years old. He's probably exiting the physical prime of his career. He wants to win a championship, and he's likely not going to do that in New England. So this trade makes sense to send a great player to a franchise that can help him win a Super Bowl. It makes sense for the Lions to get a win now player at a position of need. And it makes sense for the Patriots to dump a older, expensive veteran for a couple of draft picks to help build around your young and rookie quarterback. So with that being said, I don't think that this trade will happen. I don't think the Patriots are going to be in a huge hurry to get rid of Judon. And because of that, I still think that the price could be relatively high, right? They're not in a cap. The Patriots are not in a financial situation or a cap situation where they have to get rid of Judon to afford some other players. They still have upwards of $45 million in the cap, but I do think for the right price, they would be willing to move on from Matthew Judon. I think for the right price, the Lions would be willing to trade for Matthew Judon. Whether those two prices are the same is, of course, yet to be seen. And the likelihood is that this trade will not happen, and Matthew Judon will play out the rest of his contract in New England and potentially be a high priority free agent in 2025. But I do think this is a very interesting scenario. I do think this is a far more likely scenario than some of the other trades that have been proposed. And I do think that this could be a really interesting talking point for the Detroit Lions over the next week or so as we approach training camp as well as the preseason. With all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments below whether or not you'd be willing to trade for Matthew Judon, what the price tag would have to be for you to appreciate that trade and want that trade to go through, as well as just your overall thoughts on the player and the fit. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. But with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, please go down below and do so. You, of course, like the Detroit Lions content if you come back daily. So if you hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification, you will never miss a Detroit Lions upload. And we are shooting for 4,100 subscribers by the start of training camp. So please help us hit that goal for the channel. Well, that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.